Yes, so I'm going to present on challenges and approaches to scaling the global commons. And this is based on a paper that is to be published rather soon. I think it should be out this month or next one, that was published by Frontiers in Blockchain, or is going to be published by Frontiers in Blockchain. And my co-authors are Jeff Emmett, who should be presenting with me right now, Emmeline Friedman from, so Jeff Emmett works with the Commons Stack, Emmeline Friedman works with the Commons Engine, Rok Kranic works with the P2P Foundation, Sarah Mansky is assistant professor, if I'm not mistaken, at Santa Barbara. Then Michael Zargem, I guess many of you know him. He's the founder of Block Science and co-founder of the Commons Stack and developer of CatCat. And then last but not least, Michelle Bowens, who was also already mentioned by Evangelis as one of the, in the reformist camp of scholars working on the commons. And basically, in this paper, we compare three different takes on commoning on distributed ledgers, which are the Commons Stack, then the Commons Engine and Holochain, and finally the Economic Space Agency. And the title of the paper, Challenges and Approaches to Scaling the Global Commons, comes from a challenge, or a list of 6 challenges that Elina Ostrom outlined, which are challenges to scaling commons as solutions to global problems. And I do believe that, so Ostrom was already mentioned, I'm not going to tell you anything about her, anything further. I do think that some of you will be familiar with these challenges. So the first challenge is scaling up. The larger a community grows, the more difficult usually is coordinating that group, the more you run into problems of free riding, of disagreements, and so on. So the first challenge is we can't scale social.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello? No, that was a voice from the off. You can't scale social structures endlessly without running into problems. The second, and I would say related challenge, is cultural diversity. Cultural diversity greatly increases the difficulty of coming to terms between groups over shared resources, and linked to the first challenge of scaling up, the larger a group becomes, the more cultural diversity it has to accommodate. Third challenge is the challenge of interlinked common pool resources. Because at global scales, it becomes prohibitively difficult to oversee the interlinkages of different common pool resources, how they play into each other, where to start, and what to put aside or basically throw under the bus. And the challenge then becomes how to fairly govern these resources successfully under one framework. The fourth challenge Ostrom names is the accelerating change of developments on Earth that are linked to us humans. That is population growth, economic development, also technological change, and these just push us faster and faster past environmental thresholds, and also render old solutions that once might have worked irrelevant. And I guess you all feel that pressure is rising, right? The fifth challenge is that basically, again, the free rider problem, or the anarchy between states. In order to solve things like climate change, we would need voluntary assent between all relevant states, and the incentives to opt out are great, unless you have world government that can introduce punishments and rewards. And the last challenge is we simply have no planet B. We can't fuck this up, bluntly said. And So in our paper, we argued that rather than looking to a top-down solution that would be, in the end, world government, the next big thing will be a lot of small things. So we propose the concept of federated scaling that basically sums up the first three challenges, which revolve around the forms commons communities and their interrelations may take. While we perceive the latter three challenges as leveraging the need to find adequate forms on time. But the first challenge is scaling up. Cultural diversity and interlinked CPRs are really telling us how a structure would have to look like to be able to meet these global problems in time. And we argue that instead of using the technical notion of scaling up, endlessly scaling up one solution to ever larger size, or also invariantly scaling out, that is recreating and parallelizing one best practice model, we need federated scaling, which recognizes, or a distributed form of scaling that recognizes the need for heterogeneity and diversity of responses to global problems on local level on the one hand, and more dense horizontal coordination among these local solutions on the other hand. And this notion of federated scaling shifts the notion of scale from a technical to a social terrain, where throughput and efficiency make place for density, depth, and diversity of interrelations as the central criteria. And cultural diversity then is accommodated by a heterogeneous multitude of communities that are linked to one another through networks of fractal belonging, mutual stakeholding, and shared value systems that are embedded in protocol structuring interaction between communities. Now, a second aspect that we cover in our paper is the dialectics of markets and value autonomy, which I would say Adam has already greatly introduced. But let me be more precise on what we see in terms of crypto commons. As Vangelis also already mentioned, open value accounting is being used more and more often by communities as a source of, or as giving them internal value sovereignty. Basically, a community can decide on their own what contributions they value, how much, without having to follow external market dictates. At the same time, external coordination is pursued through market mechanisms. However, the aim here is to inscribe common aims, and not individual aims of profit into this exchange. And there are more and more experiments with this, and this is what we're going to look at in the cases, what we're looking at in the cases. A third aspect I would like to mention are derivatives that function as, that are being increasingly used as value membranes. Basically that separate internal value sovereignty from external market command. And these derivatives also act as proxies for commodification that allow us to both satisfy individual aims of profit and common aims. And finally, yeah, I think I'm going to skip that part on markets are not capitalism, not necessarily, because Adam already covered that at length. Now, the three cases I do want to briefly compare are the Common Stack, Holochain's Commons Engine, and the Economic Space Agency. And now, I don't really want to go through this whole table because it's a bit full of text and boring, but rather I thought I'm going to introduce briefly each of them and then go through the most relevant categories here. So the Common Stack, and I think most of you might know the Common Stack, the Common Stack's premise is to realign incentives around the provision of public goods in order to overcome the tension between individual and common interest, which they see at the core of existing limitations to commoning, as Vangelis mentioned, right? So the proposed solution by the Common Stack is a toolkit of computational constitutional patterns or mechanisms which facilitate funding, governance over common resource allocation, retrospective and real-time data analysis, as well as prospective modeling and simulation of commons-oriented DAOs. And in particular, the Common Stack introduces bonding curves as a new tool for collective preference estimation and shared resource allocation, which act as semi-permeable value transfer interfaces, derivatives, or as what I like to call mimetic derivatives, which allow individuals to take position on the effective capacity of an idea that might be to clean up a beach. And the augmentation the Common Stack introduces to a bonding curve. So you had bonding curves before the Common Stack with Simon de la Rivière, for example, who introduced that for meme markets in 2017. What the Common Stack does is introduce an augmentation, which is taxation. So it allows individuals to speculate on the effective capacity of the idea of let's clean that beach. I think many more people will find that idea great and will chip in money. So I buy first and I have a profit potential. However, through taxation, we fill a common pool that is then actually used to actually clean up that beach. So it is not just a speculative zero-sum game, but actually it does it does result in a clean beach. And so that is roughly the Common Stack's take or starting point. Now, the Commons engine takes a rather different approach, which is informed by traditions of complementary currencies and mutual credit systems. And so in its simplest form, it uses asset-backed currencies, which appear as a direct representation of the resource, good, or service they track and modulate. So basically one token for one asset. And by doing so, the Commons engine aims to disentangle the two most contradictory functions of money, that is, acting as a store of value and a medium of exchange. And this contradiction is resolved by inscribing not only a particular use value, but also the temporality of that use value into an array of asset-backed currencies. What does that mean? That means that by doing so, this has the effect of sorting currencies into exchange media for everyday goods like food, treated water, clothes, or whatever, and value stores, for example, wood, homes, and identities, so longer lasting assets that are stores of value. And doing so, the Commons engine argues that this greatly increases the transparency within economies, for example, allowing communities to track, modulate, and extend access to universal human basics like food, water, energy, and housing. And in addition to asset-backed currencies, or to this array of asset-backed currencies, the Commons engine introduces mutual credit accounting as a source of liquidity that facilitates exchange independently from big capital and banks. Now, finally, the Economic Space Agency, or EXA in brief, more directly puts capitalism itself up for debate, as it sets out to reimagine markets, price, and profit in cooperative terms. EXA's vision of digital economic networks as intentionally designed spaces that have social values beyond profit directly inscribed into the protocols of interaction themselves is a structural and highly generic interpretation of Commons ambitions. Now, while in their capitalist shape, protocols such as markets, pricing, or profit making may be oriented exclusively towards private property and self-interest, EXA basically claims or speculates that these protocols could also meaningfully be redesigned as spaces of exchange to serve shared social values, common values such as human rights, working conditions, income distribution, environment, social impact, etc. And they do this on the one hand through the extensive use of derivatives that allow the translation of multi-dimensional value indices, value systems into one-dimensional indices, and therefore allow betting or position taking on these performances, but also through a distributed exchange protocol and a mutual credit system and many more. I must say here that this is all on a conceptual level. The Economic Space Agency has not put out code yet. Now I would just briefly go through the more interesting aspects in order to not overwhelm you with information on these three different projects. But what I find most interesting here is on that first part of the table is the approach to markets. So as said, the Common Stack basically replaces decentralized markets, which are based on offers, with one central automated market maker, while the Commons engine approaches markets through multiple targeted currencies on a per asset basis, which reflect the dynamic, productive, and carrying capacity of an economy or the planet, ideally. And EXA perceives market or approaches market through the protocolization of things like indirect matchmaking, mutual credit, and other protocols they devise. While the Common Stack and the EXA actively encourage speculation, the Commons engine is more traditional, sticks with complementary currencies and the rejection of speculation. Okay, that the other parts are not so interesting here. Interesting is federated social scaling. I think what the Common Stack offers in terms of federated scaling is a web of governance functions based on nested bonding curves. So one bonding curve that accepts tokens of another bonding curve as a reserve. Very technical. Holochain instead brings us networks of reputation that are based on self-sovereign identity structures, which allow basically actors to take the reputation they have gained in one community and go to another community and build on that reputation, right? And EXA has yet a different proposal of building structures of federated scale, which is based on mutual stakeholding and on shared socioeconomic grammars that define an economic space. They all have rather different ways of inscribing external aims or shared common aims into exchange value. The Common Stack does this ad hoc, basically through taxation and then funding these external aims. Holochain simply does it through ex ante, but inscribes this through asset and reputation-based backed currencies, while not really going further into detail how that achieves these external aims. And then EXA finally uses derivatives, as said, in order to fulfill external aims. I think I'm gonna conclude here because I've been talking for a while now. So I would like to recap that on the one hand, we do believe that Ostrom's challenges will not be solved by one monolithic solution, but rather by a multiplicity of bottom-up initiatives that can use some of the affordances of distributed ledger technologies for stig-merging cooperation and for formalizing interdependencies and mutual strategies and aims. On the second, we see this approach to redefine markets, to actually inscribe common aims into exchange itself in order to use the great scalability of markets and the great strength of markets as coordination mechanisms, while getting rid of the strictly individual profit-driven motive there. I think that all the discussed projects and their proposals can be seen as incremental steps towards post-capitalism. Adding to Adam's point on markets not necessarily being capitalism and capitalism not necessarily being fully free markets, I think what distributed ledger technology really does is undermine the legal privilege of protected capitalists, of capitalists that are protected by the state. For example, banks with banking licenses, but also other monopolists or oligopolists of big capital, because there is no legal privilege on distributed ledger technology. And finally, I want to highlight that all of this is contingent on us actually delivering that work, on us actually continuing to build the world we want to see out there. And now I want to close by thanking Metagame for being on the forefront of doing that, of building the world we want to see out there. I also want to invite all of you guys to join the more theoretical debate on crypto commons during this year's Crypto Commons Gathering, which is a physical 7-day event in July or in September, depending on how the pandemic continues in the countryside in Austria. You find some information on that on www.crypto-commons.org/ccg-21. And yeah, with that, I'd like to close.